All right. Thank you guys for joining us. So this is our investor panel, and we're joined by three amazing investors. We have George here, who's the managing director at Inside. He has over 20 years of being an operator. He took Alteryx to IPO, and we definitely lean on his advice to shape our go-to-market motion. So welcome, George.
Thank you, Lavanya. Great to be here.
We also have James, who's also an investor in Weighted Biases. He's a partner at Bloomberg Beta. He's incredibly thoughtful, and he's always willing to help his companies in whatever way they need. And I personally love working with James. Welcome, James.
Good to be here.
And then lastly, we have Sarah, who is a GP at Amplify Partners, and she's one of the smartest people I've met. And what I love about Sarah is that she has incredibly thoughtful opinions on a variety of topics, and you leave every conversation with Sarah feeling like a smarter person. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us.
I don't know that I'll be able to live up to that intro, but thank you for it.
Of course. So I'm excited to have you guys all in one room, and I have some really spicy questions for us today. So let's start with a simple one. Is machine learning even a good space to invest right now? We see a lot of companies, there's a lot of hype, but there's very few companies that are making money and building ROI efficient businesses. And anyone can jump in.
It's funny because you said, this is a relatively simple question. I actually think that is one of the spiciest questions that you can ask. And frankly, I think, the answer that I can share is I don't know. Certainly as somebody who invests heavily in tools and platforms, I feel like we're perhaps not far enough along in at least the LLM journey to really draw conclusions about the set of tools that people need, about a dominant design for the LLM stack, and about kind of the relationship between the LLM stack, the ML stack, and the existing data and application stack. It feels like we're still in this kind of early inning period where existing tech companies, companies like Stripe, Etsy, et cetera, they're forming teams to kind of define and implement their LLM strategy, but they haven't like stubbed their toe yet. I suspect that we're going to learn a lot from the problems that they encounter and the decisions that they make in the coming months. So I think, the next couple of years will be a great time to invest in ML tools and platforms. But right now I do have, pretty significant questions about kind of the uncertainty associated with just the needs, the tools, and even the models.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. The only thing that I'd add is that the interesting difference right now is that the assumption is that the big companies are actually pretty good in setting up their applications and their LLM related applications. And historically, that's usually not the case. Usually the big legacy companies are really bad at adoption. I don't know whether that's because of something about the nature of LLMs or whether that's right now just because we're just going to find out all the ways that big companies can't adopt LLMs. And so you'll end up looking, my guess is over the next 3 to 18 months at sort of LLM native companies and what they're doing differently, and you'll find some disconnect. And I am trying to pay a lot of attention to that. And I'm very hopeful that when George finds out what are the secrets he's learning from Jasper, that he'll tell the rest of us.
So I guess I should comment on that in terms of where we have at least initially started to take some early thoughts in terms of how this market is going to evolve. And so when we looked at the space regarding large language models and just what generative AI could really sort of become, our starting point was less so, this sort of finished offering in terms of how an application could come to market, but also just, I think Sarah indicated some of the building blocks that were necessary. And at Inside, we had a very strong focus on looking at the modern data stack up to that moment in terms of just being able to get your private data well organized. We certainly, thought through how the MLOps experience was going to play out, and specifically where MLOps could be leveraged for the building of applications, including generative AI based applications. And then what are these sort of potential markets where a generative experience could be transformational? And I think as we went through that journey, we of course came across Jasper, and Jasper certainly spoke to a lot of the elements that I just described a moment ago, where they were able to take an early lead in at least the content marketing space with a very prescribed, curated view of what, in this case, an OpenAI based, finely tuned LLM model could be for the content marketer, and package that very naturally with workflow and a compelling user experience, a UX that was profoundly kind of focused on how a content marketer lives and works. And I think that really kind of played out in terms of how Jasper has been able to become the second fastest growing software company in the history of SaaS in the last 18 months. And so for us, we look for more opportunities like that, where there are, more complete solutions in market that are effectively built off of the previous experiences around the modern data stack and MLOps. And I think Sarah has an important point that there could be some delineation in terms of what a pure LLM first stack and a pure, to James's point, LLM first company could look like. But ultimately, there's still some immediate opportunities, and we keep looking for them where they might exist, where you can find a complete solution for a market that needs a generative first offering.
And George, when you think about some of the new infrastructure or developer problems that you've run into at Jasper, can you talk about any of those? I think it'd just be really interesting for the crowd to hear what are the things that you're now, or what they're worried about and how you're thinking about it with them.
Well, no surprise, I'm not, saying anything that anyone wouldn't be already thinking about today. If you see a business at scale like Jasper in such a short period of time, you have to start thinking about what that underlying infrastructure is that'll support, the long-term durability of that business. And one, key factor around it is, well, how much does the dependence on OpenAI play out for a business like Jasper over time? Well, it's actually one of the first things we worked on, right? To look at ways that there's a more experimentation and orchestration oriented layer that could ensemble across multiple large language models to basically create a finely tuned, sort of domain specific LLM that Jasper would be able to leverage. Some of that already manifests itself even in the generative AI conference that Jasper hosted a few weeks back, where they announced a partnership with HubSpot, where HubSpot's now taking advantage of the finely tuned Jasper specific, or more broadly, marketing content specific LLM that HubSpot is now leveraging to be able to, build their own capabilities around Jasper's API. And so I think that's an indicator of how the early aspects of this market are going to play out. Anyone who's not building their own LLM is going to be anyone who has to rely on someone's capability there is likely going to come up with ways that they can have their own orchestration and they can have their own ensemble, so that they're not reliant on a single LLM provider. And that's already played out even in Jasper's capabilities up to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting journey, and also kind of speaks to what I was describing before about like not really understanding what the dominant design for the LLM stack might be. Now, the challenges that companies face, like when they're interfacing with the OpenAI APIs, that's a very, very different set of challenges, and frankly, a different margin profile than companies that are either like pre-training or fine-tuning their own models from scratch. As you were talking about scaling too, it's also a reminder that like even LLM-driven applications, like there's still applications and user expectations for applications, I think, are both high and continue to evolve. One of the things that I think a lot about kind of investing across different types of technical tools and platforms and interfacing a lot with like the database community and the distributed systems community, is that, I believe in the future apps will not only be intelligent, but like they're going to be faster, and they're going to be collaborative. And like fast collaborative apps without LLMs are challenging to build. One of my observations in kind of playing with some of these new LLM-driven tools is that they're all so damn slow. So I think we're going to see a lot, even as these LLM native companies start to scale and start to encounter, the same types of scaling challenges that like more traditional software companies also face.
I want to dig more into this large model stack. I think this is a very interesting idea. What do you think it looks like, and what tools and platforms are essential for developers to build their own large model-driven applications?
Well, I'll start with a softball answer on that, and thanks for asking it, Lavanya. It actually turns out that at least one element of the LLM stack is going to be some core capability around this tracking, parameter tuning, version controls, which it's compelling to see that weights and biases is now deployed at 100% of all the original LLM creators as we speak. And so that's a pretty early indicator again, but it kind of speaks to where we see the creator market, particularly around large scale LLM deployment go, but also it's going to speak to the fact that domain specific finely tuned models will also need to be leveraged off of the fact that you can do those same experiments, you can do that same tracking, you can do the same parameter sweeps that you need in an experience like its biases. So I think that is one starting point, and certainly benefits the center of the MLOps experience today. I think there will be other capabilities that will also be needed. But right now, the model development has taken such priority and center stage that anyone who's enabling and easing the challenges around model development as a provider of tools will generally benefit for at least the next half a decade or more.
Yeah, I think, another key question again is like, are you prompting a model? Are you interfacing with an LLM API? Or are you fine-tuning and or pre-training your own models from scratch? And the developer experience associated with each today is just radically different. Like if you are prompting, then certainly having kind of better tools for like prompt version control, prompt evaluation, I think certainly becomes a issue. I'm shocked by the number of companies that cannot answer the question, what is the correlation between kind of like subsets of prompts and user behavior? Like what subsets of prompts might cause users to churn? So certainly, I think there's a whole set of tooling there that's needed. But if you're fine tuning and or doing pre-training, additional pre-training, then your ML stack starts to look much different. I think there's a lot of more kind of fundamental data management technology that is needed to ensure that you're training on kind of the right slices of data and that you understand performance across those slices of data. Certainly your compute requirements go up a lot. And so investing in kind of additional model optimization becomes necessary in order to kind of meet those latency requirements and ensure that like you're building a good business. You're not spending $40 million in order to generate $1 million in ARR. I don't think we yet really know how like prompting versus fine tuning will be used. It's really difficult to even make an assertion like, should I be using my own models? Should I be using these LLM APIs? Because the APIs continue to get better. And determining when you have a task that is kind of specific enough or kind of like disparate enough from a next word prediction task, where additional pre-training is going to be useful, where fine-tuning would be useful. Making that determination is still like pretty hard and feels like a moving target.
Let me say something controversial. I think that if you're building a business on top of LLMs right now, you should just think about it as incurring lots and lots of high interest rate debt, that you should just like sort of worry more about figuring out what are the boundaries of the interfaces for humans and the business models, and you should be playing around that more rather than necessarily trying to figure out your unit costs or deciding whether or not to fine tune the model. My guess is in the vast majority of the most interesting LLM native businesses, a lot of them will just be clever product people rather than brilliant technical people. And I think right now that there's a little bit of a race to just figure out what works and doesn't work, that we have very, very few examples of applications that are actually good. And in some ways, I feel like that's the place to play right now. And admittedly, you know, sort of, I think we're more infrastructure developer type folks, right? But I think that I'm constantly surprised that there's not more variation going on in application world.
So that is a spicy take, and I agree and disagree to an extent. I certainly think that there are businesses that can be built on top of these LLM APIs where they will not require additional fine-tuning, where they will not require pre-training, and where you can invest primarily in the user experience. One of the things that has surprised me is that, frankly, I think the LLM kind of hacker community today is primarily composed of people who don't have a background in ML. But what I've also observed is that like a lot of the things that they're building look the same. Like how many pitches for code startups do each of you see every week? How many like copywriting kind of like Jasper lookalikes do we see every week? And I think part of the reason why we see so much convergence behind the same use cases is that there isn't a real fundamental understanding of how these models work, when they fail, what like it means to fine tune, or you know what it means to prompt tune, and without like you don't need a deep understanding of the underlying technology, but without an understanding of the underlying technology, I think it's really difficult to like get creative. One of the things that is inspiring to me is I spent a lot of time at universities too, kind of trying to better understand where like research and industry needs are going to converge. And on a recent trip to Caltech, like I talked to people who were thinking about like using LLMs for weather forecasting and biomarker discovery and planning and robotic systems. And like, I want to see more of that. I want to see people think beyond like code gen and copywriting. But I do think that requires kind of a more nuanced understanding of ML.
Interesting. So do you think there's a space for educating product people more on the intricacies of the LLMs and fine tuning? And if we could just do that, then their brains are way more maybe creative, or like they know how to think of those UI experiences that James talked about. And how do we educate them on the LLMs?
So I do think that's part of it. The weird part, of course, is that this is a constantly moving target, and we don't really have a great sense of what the architecture is going to look like. But I do think that the brave and interesting product people who are willing to dive in right now are going to make lots of mistakes, but also they're going to be the ones to figure out the insights sooner. And I totally agree with Sarah in the sense that if you are successful building something or come up with a novel interface or novel business, then you're going to have to go back and redo a bunch of work if it turns out to be interesting. But my point there more being that like there should be more Jasper-like founders out there, and they should be trying more weird things. And I'm sort of surprised that it isn't happening.
See, like one of the companies that I perhaps like regret not investing in the most is a company called Fresh Technologies. They're kind of applying reinforcement learning and other types of machine learning to optimize perishable goods inventory management for groceries. And the founding team includes one co-founder who's also a professor at Cornell Tech with a background in RL, another co-founder with like a very, very strong engineering background, and a third co-founder who had a background in kind of the grocery sector in snacks. And we saw like back in 2017, 2018, probably around that time that the company was founded, that like those companies overperformed. Like the companies where you had the ML expertise and you had the product or domain expertise and, you had the engineering expertise. And I feel like there's been like a little bit of FOMO in the VC community where we're like, oh man, if we don't make our LLM investment now, like we're going to miss out. But frankly, like I think we're better off like waiting for those complete teams that know the tech, that know the domain, that know how to like build products at scale, rather than like trying to pick and choose subsets of expertise.
George, you were part of making big architecture shifts before, right? I mean, how do you think about this big architecture shift compared to like the move from client server to the web or something like that? Or you think about your Alteryx turnaround?
Yeah, so I think it is as big, potentially even bigger than what we saw with the shift to mobile and the shift to cloud, and that will take time. And I think we're in the first few moments of the ball game, not even in the first inning yet. And because everyone can see this opportunity and can see how this ball game will play out, for quite a while. There is a little bit of an urgency, and I think just to Sarah's point, there's an urgency that might just need to just a little bit more contained and just get rid of the FOMO for a moment and really focus on finding those incredible businesses that'll emerge in this next half a decade or more. And I think part of that is a complete view on how the team plus the domain plus the user experience and the workflow around the enterprise space creates something compelling in the category, something that's imaginative in the category. And that doesn't happen overnight. And just because you're throwing an LLM, whether you're taking it off of an existing API or you're fine-tuning your own model, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight to build a compelling product in the user experience. So I would just encourage anyone who's either investing or building in this space, as much as there is all of this buzz and all this, kinetic activity that's happening right now, this will play itself out over the next decade or longer. And ultimately, every software category is going to have a LLM being at the center of its category. And whether that be delivered by incumbent or would that be delivered by a upstart that's, coming into market right now, we won't see the outcome of that for quite a while. But right now is the time to build. I think it is absolutely time to build and experiment and try things and presume that, everything that we deem today isn't going to necessarily be durable, because I think we're in the mode of learning and experimentation. That's a good thing.
And so we've talked a lot about like these LLM applications. Just switching gear to like the people building these models, do you think there's a place to gain competitive advantage by building your own large models? And is it even possible for people who are not the big incumbents to do this? Or is it just the big players will build the models and then the smaller players will just fine tune them?
I mean, I think like if you believe in possibility in the advancement of technologies, you've got to believe that there's an opportunity for others to build models, for the same reason that we believe that like new companies can build new databases. I think a lot of the models that we see today have been designed for kind of a subset of tasks. Again, like tasks that tend to look like either image, video, audio generation tasks, or language modeling tasks. But, there are other tasks, perhaps, like weather forecasting might be an example, or things related to like structured or time series data could be another, where, these models sometimes like underperform. So I do imagine that there will be opportunities to build new types of models. I think, even the best AI researchers would also say that like, we don't know that the transformer architecture is the end. Like it is quite possible in the next 5 years that like a new type of model architecture emerges. There had been a lot of recent research on like state machines and things like that that ends up kind of outperforming transformers. So I mean, I think it's possible. I guess the question is like, is it probable?
I think the reason why so much of the current large language model development is in some way tied closer to the hyperscalers is mainly because of the limitation on compute resources, right? When you look at where, the intensivity of both, the training and the inference in building a large language model, and then of course being able to deliver it at scale, you still need a significant amount of GPU-based compute as the current, sort of paradigm. I think that will change. I think there will be more, sort of domain-specific inference-oriented AI chips that will emerge. I think the cost of inference will come down. I think there will be some near-term challenges in terms of supply on the chip side that has kind of created a somewhat block in terms of who has access to GPUs at scale, and mainly the cloud providers are the ones that have access to GPUs at scale. And so it's been interesting to notice that every LLM that has been funded up to this point, there's about 6 or 7 major ones that have now taken somewhere between, minimum 200 million to, as much as 1.5 billion, not including OpenAI, which of course, took a big $10 billion round, plus with Microsoft. Each one of them has some tie-in to one of the key hyperscalers. And I think in the short term that limitation is what it is. And I think in the midterm that should change for a number of reasons. One is just a greater supply of like just AI oriented chips that will emerge, and a greater supply that will be deployable in various infrastructures. But it's also an interesting thing to see how more efficient models, right? The ones, the text ones are pretty large in it, and that's why they're of course called large language models, because the number of parameters we're now throwing at these models, and the loss function around them is so interesting because you're not losing any degradation in model as you throw more parameters over time. I think in other modalities, if we look at like image processing, we look at video processing, models are actually much more compact, and models, particularly on the generative side, don't have to require as much processing per se to both build it, and inference costs are still quite expensive. So some of this has to just kind of come down to the economics of like supply side challenges for what it takes to serve and manage and deploy these models at scale. Once that unlocks in the next several years, I think we'll see less dependency on all the hyperscalers. But for now, it seems like there's a pretty critical dependency on who has access to the GPUs.
So George, under what conditions would you have invested, or would you invest in one of these sort of attempts to spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to build very big models?
So just to be, forthright, we have passed on every one of the, investments, and, that'll be an interesting, discussion 5 or 6 years from now, right? Whether it made sense to pass on them or not. I think for us, we personally had a difficult time seeing, the financial returns around those investments, because it seemed like every one of the investments that were made, a lot of those investments were also tied to retirement of compute, right, by the hyperscaler. So, if you were making a $10 investment, there was $1 of compute bill that was retired in every one of these deals. And so inherently it made a lot of sense, right, for the hyperscalers to make the investments that they have done. But I think with a a financially oriented growth equity, sort of check coming in at scale from a venture capital firm like Insight, we could have come to a reasonable math that made sense to make those investments at this scale. And so that's why we purposely chose to see, where some of these applied use cases would come about, like the Jaspers of the world, and where we saw the use of the right tools that would be needed to build models and build the applications around these models at scale, with the investment in the likes of weights and biases. But for now, we have purposely stayed out of the building of the large language models themselves. We're big believers in it. I almost equivocate this to like their R&D that's required to fund the space program. But we'd rather see the benefits of the industries that form after the investment phase.
I have a related question there. So like, certainly I think like, as an early stage fund, like many of these companies go straight to raising, $40, $50 million. So, we haven't been as focused on those types of investments. That said, one of the things that I've struggled to make a conclusion about is this model wherein these companies are kind of research product hybrids, where their primary goal may not be commercializing a product or even driving towards profitability, but rather AGI. Even a year ago, somebody came to me with like one of these ideas where like they wanted to do research, and in the course of doing research, spin off various products. And I remember at the time, like advising this person, like, that's a bad idea. Like, all ideas have, some merit to them, but like, that is going to be very challenging to execute upon. And I think back to that conversation and wonder, like, if I misguided that person. And I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that. Like, a lot of these kind of AGI companies, like, they're not only spending hundreds of millions of dollars on compute, but they're doing so in pursuit of AGI, not profitability. Like, does that change how you would think about an investment?
For you though, Sarah, let's say, I'm just trying to imagine like the big LLM foundational model company that you would have invested in. Like, was there a version of the business model where like someone could have convinced you to say, yeah, let's invest and build one of these? Like, what would have that looked like?
I mean, at the time, at least, like, and again, this is why I posed the question out there. Like, I think I'd probably be more inclined to invest in a company that had as its primary focus a goal of building and iterating on products rather than the split initiative of research and commercialization. I'm sure that there are obviously other considerations, and certainly perhaps like a big fear of mine is that like these companies will never have a margin profile that is aligned with like the tastes of public market investors. But again, I do wonder about this kind of split focus thing, and if it's something that can exist or if it's something that needs to be resolved.
James, do you have an
I think it'll be.
answer?
I was just gonna say, I think it will be hard at the time to have that split focus. I believe that there is important fundamental research that's happening here. I don't necessarily believe that getting to on stage around AGI is even the right answer. I think that there might be some really compelling moments in this whole journey that just solving for a better human machine symbiosis alone, right, across 1,000 domains is more interesting to me than reaching a single AGI. And we'll see how it plays out, but I honestly think it is a genuinely quixotic journey to go down the AGI pathway now, when there is an opportunity to build 1,000 different domains of human machine analysis.
I think that there's a great question around whether or not these are railroad tracks in the sense that they become infrastructure that lasts for decades and not centuries. And I don't think so. I think that the hard part with these big models, at least right now, is that they do get cheaper and cheaper to make. And, every 10x or every 50x bigger the cost of building it, but, it's a mixture of both data, obviously, and sort of the size of the models, it's not clear that it's durable, right? And so that's probably, I think, the reason why smart people like George and Sarah avoided it. And I don't have a great answer there. I mean, I think one claim was that there'd be secret process knowledge around acquiring and cleaning data, or there might be secret process knowledge around running very, very big systems. And that might turn out to be true, right? I mean, tell me what TSMC's moat is, right? Or one of these companies. And so that's where I'd be wrong, right? That if it's possible that we'll look like 50 years from now and there's going to be the equivalent of TSMC, where there'll just be a small set of folks who actually understand how to get something done at like the appropriate scale. I don't think so, but that would be the counter case.
So what types of startups would you guys, ML startups, would you guys invest in today? We talked about large language models maybe not being a good bet. Like every friend that I have is building something like a Jasper. And like, it's like almost like a brain virus, like the crypto thing, but now everyone's building something like this. What should they be building and what would you invest in?
So I think Sarah alluded to it quite well. There's just plenty of other software domains to build amazing things, right? Look at the entire opportunity around where the PLM market is, right? A product lifecycle market. Look at the entire opportunity around where you can do next generation computer-aided design applications. Why would there be an incredible viewpoint to how the generative model would fit in? Look at the way currently testing software works. There isn't like a great answer in terms of just how to really create better, more scaled out automation in the testing space. So I believe that there are plenty of other things to do than to write the next writing application. There's plenty of those, but if you've already been investing into it. But I think as founders start to look at these opportunities, they'll find plenty of room where even incumbents aren't moving as fast. Nothing in other areas, like the incumbents are moving pretty fast, and they're going to take up the space because they're just going to be as smart as any upstart would be in their respective market. But I think there are definite opportunities where a dislocation is possible from just a new entrant coming in and building in an area that has been mostly a static experience, particularly for the software front end.
So I've got two observations. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
No, I was just going to say that I think we had discussed this before, but like domain expertise do matter. One of the reasons why I think, I don't want to say like building developer tools is easy, but one of the kind of archetypes of an Amplify founder is somebody who has encountered a problem like in their job, built a solution, recognized that solution could be applied in other contexts, and then decided to kind of commercialize that. I think there are all types of domains now, again, that have been kind of untouched by LLMs. But what is most important for like those who are considering building in this category is to focus on like problems that they understand rather than like going out to search for problems that could potentially be addressed by LLMs. We were early investors in a company called Runway ML. And the last time that Chris Valenzuela, the founder of Runway, visited San Francisco, like we went on a walk and like visited the Diego Rivera murals at SF MoMA. Chris is an artist. Like he's exhibited at like Lollapalooza and like museums throughout Santiago. He understands creatives. He builds tools for people who he understands deeply because he's been in their shoes. And I think like we need to see more of that. I hope that kind of the indie hacker community around LLMs kind of expands more into those with domain expertise in other verticals. And then I do eventually think that we will see more, LLM tools and infra.
Okay, so here's my observation. My observation is in the same way that every great web application developer, when starting Ruby on Rails or starting anything new, makes a to-do app, right? They just can't help themselves. Everyone should build a writing app, and then they should sort of like think of it as like a palate cleanser. You need to get it out of your system, and then you'll learn a lot about like the boundaries of the system, and then do something else, right? But the real answer is you do have to try first, right? And the writing app is like the obvious first easy thing to do and the thing that hits your head. And that's fine, but you should probably move on pretty quickly. Unless you have the Jasper killer, which don't tell George about it, but tell me and Sarah.
Okay.
I mean, the funny thing is that like I actually so like not every developer, but like many developers at some point in their life have like built a note-taking app. And the funny thing is that like I actually think building a like killer LLM driven note-taking app is an incredibly like challenging feat. Because going back to what I was saying, like it now needs to be collaborative. Like frankly, like I've tried some of these LLM driven text editors and I'm like, you don't have commenting, sharing, collaboration, like that's a deal breaker for me. It needs to be fast. So perhaps I guess to your point, James, like in attempting to build some of these things, I think we'll start to see too, like the limitations of LLMs and just how hard it is to kind of build a killer product that is not just a killer LLM driven product, but like a killer product in its own right.
Well, Sarah, you mentioned the note-taking piece. It was interesting to hear that, right? Because I was mentioning some of these moments where incumbents can just as easily come into your market. And if you look at what Notion has done, right, as one of the more modern note-taking applications, and have done incredibly well, they introduce a generative capability effectively as a feature into what Notion does as a note-taking app. So it actually does point to there are moments where these incumbents even in existing markets can make some pretty interesting, innovative features just by the fact that they're introducing an LLM into how the core application works.
It's nice to know that like the startup advice still from hearing from you guys is the same, which is like pick a problem that you understand, make sure you have domain expertise, then see if LLMs are fit there. But like even if you do, make sure the user experience is fast and like it's really good, like James said, like, it's innovative, and then also find a founding team where someone has the domain expertise and then someone understands machine learning. Is that a good summary of like what startups should be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that we're saying the same thing in like 25 years too. Like I don't know that any of that changes. You just like kind of swap off, like LLMs for, I don't know, like voodoo mind tricks and like same.
Yeah. Okay. Now there is a nuance though, right? Which is some of this depends on where we are in the cycle. And so, building a cloud-based application in 2018 is very different than 2020 versus 2010, right? And so when you are so early in the cycle and everyone's just trying to figure everything out, I think there are a bunch of design decisions and assumptions that founders are going to have to make. And there's going to be lots of work they're going to have to do that honestly might turn out to be commodified a year from now. And like, I think the task of the great founders are to like roll with the punches, right? And sort of like lean in on that.
That's a good point. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. Let's get into the lightning round. So I'm going to pose a bunch of questions. If you guys can keep your answers to 15, 20 seconds each, and we'll go in the order of maybe Sarah, George, and James to end us. Cool. Oops, I lost my questions right. Cool. So the first question is, how does Stability make money when they're committed to open sourcing everything they do?
No comment.
George.
I'm still figuring that out.
I think that they've been savvy about doing a bunch of BD investments and connections that may result in like lots and lots of revenue over the next 5 years.
Interesting. Do you believe? Is prompt engineering a real job that might happen in the next year or so?
Software development. Software development is a real job, and I anticipate that in the future, prompt engineering will become part of the software development role.
I think prompt engineering is going to be a critical skill set for every product manager.
Ching?
I think it might be even bigger than that.
So it sounds like every software engineer, every PM, and almost everyone needs to learn prompt engineering. Got it. Are there any parallels between Bitcoin and AI that you're seeing?
There are definitely a lot of people flowing from crypto into AI. There's definitely a lot of hype behind AI. I think there is more impact to be immediately unlocked with AI than crypto. And more precedent too. Like we've been talking about AI
since 1950s.
Yeah. I was going to say close to century, not quite there yet, but like for a long time.
Yeah.
I would be really excited if all crypto investors kept doing crypto.
Me too.
I think there are dynamics around building some of these models and the capital requirements and expectations and the sort of increasing sort of expectations of like increasing investment that are similar to crypto.
What is the most overhyped machine learning company right now?
I don't want to answer that. I
don't have a good answer on like the most overhyped company right now. Yeah, it's a tough one.
James is thinking. James.
I mean, I think it's just interesting actually that I kind of think that on the ML side, actually, the marketing has been actually kind of bad and behind the times, right? That actually, I kind of think that there is room for some ML company to get better at marketing if they get really overhyped.
Cool. Last question. If you were starting a machine learning company today, what startup would you start?
My love has always been in tools and infra. I think there will be a lot of challenges that companies face, particularly as they scale beyond the prototyping phase with LLMs and the LLM APIs into building LLMs into existing products. So I would start a tools company. I'd have to. It's the only thing I could do.
Yeah, I for my own skill sets, I would also feel like starting a tools company, particularly in the data analytics space, would be pretty exciting at this moment. I also see some pretty compelling opportunities for founders who've had previous experience, particularly in certain domains that have been regulated, like healthcare and financial services. In those markets, you can build a regulated domain-specific model, which would be pretty exciting, and what you can accomplish with those models, particularly in healthcare and financial services. That wouldn't be myself doing that, but I could definitely see some incredible founders doing work in a domain that they've had previous experience in.
George will be your chairman if you convince him to join and help you. And I think the big opportunity right now that's being missed is the LLMs talking to themselves. I think that in all likelihood, the interfaces will be, sort of maybe 1,000 times more between LLMs talking to themselves rather than like a human interface.
So you're building a dating app?
Or boring management app. Boring management app.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. That was great discussion. We'll drop your Twitter so people can find you and ask you more questions. I really appreciate George and James for all of your advice that you've given us over the years. And Sarah, hope to work with you in the future, but also love talking to you. Thank you guys.